Welcome to Life, Laughter, Divorce, episode 61. I am your host, Leanne Linsky.
And I'm the boyfriend.
Welcome back for another wonderful week of divorce.
They just keep coming.
They do, and they're going to continue to come. That's the way the world works, you guys.
At least the world of marriages in this day.
It does. So while you're out there tuning in, make sure you rate, review, and subscribe, unless, of course, you're driving. Don't do that. The boyfriend hasn't figured out how to do it verbally. Mr. Techie over here. Is delayed on that assignment. But hey, if you're at your desktop or somewhere safe, also while you're out there, make sure you check out the website at lifelaughterdivorce.com and check out the retail therapy, because you may need to feel better with our wonderful, lighthearted, handcrafted, divorce-themed soaps and candles. Even the boyfriend uses them.
I still use them. I love them. And now that it's spring, I don't know. It's been nice to have them filling the air of the apartment.
It's nice to have you showering every day and using soap. So, oh, yes. You know, I'm excited about this week's episode. This week, we actually spoke to an attorney.
An actual attorney. That's our first one, right?
I want to say yes. We've had some recovering attorneys. We've had some mediators, definitely people in the legal business, but our first full-on attorney.
Yeah. So
focused on her attorney in business. Yeah.
Which is representing family law and all of
the
things that go along with divorce.
Right.
So, talking about attorneys, we've talked about your attorneys. You've had or attorney for both of your divorces, right?
Yes.
So I have not been married. I've had to deal with attorneys before in my past, but that's for other reasons. How was your experiences with your attorney?
Well, mine was good. I mean, I believe that I found my attorney through a referral. So someone I worked with handed me a business card and said, here, this guy, I've used him before. And my divorce attorney actually, I think at the time was into personal injury more so than he was into divorce law. Right? I think so. And I went and found him, and he was very straightforward to the point. And what I really liked about him, he's like, look, I don't want to waste your time or your money. If you guys aren't arguing over anything, this is what you need to do. And he kind of gave me a little checklist. I wrote it down, went home, and we put everything together and talked to my husband. And, we divided all the assets, all of them. There weren't many because we were in our early 20s, fortunately. So we just decided, well, you get this, you like this bedspread, great, you get that. I mean, these were just like the few things that we had. And
but so what it sounds like is you guys had the same lawyer?
We did. We shared the same lawyer. Well, what's the point? If you don't have anything, what are you arguing for?
That's true. You just increase lawyer fees and they make money because they have to talk and
right. Now, we did have a house, and we did, have belongings in the house, and we both had vehicles, but we didn't have children, and we didn't have tons of equity in the home and things like that. So there wasn't a lot to really argue about. I mean, we could have, I suppose, but that would have been silly.
That was for your first?
That was for my first marriage. So
did your second marriage go the same way, or second divorce go the same way?
Yes. And
one lawyer
both times, and the same lawyer. And I did all the footwork on that in both cases. But it was like we were so young, and there wasn't, and again, in the second marriage, there was a house, and we had some money and, vehicles, and yeah, we had some things, but we both just wanted out. So what we did is we sat down. In both cases, we basically agreed, and we were like, well, that's fair. I didn't ask for anything that wasn't fair, and neither did they. I think we both said, let's leave with what we came into the marriage. You get what you brought in. I get what I brought in. And then anything that we accumulated together, it's like, well, what makes most sense? And I think for me, it was, I don't know. I didn't find in either case that I needed to be vindictive or vengeful. It was over, and it's, how do we make this work and get it over? Even though there were hurt feelings,
Yes, but that's not every case. Some women
Right.
or some parties, it could be
Yes.
women or men,
Right.
are very vindictive and they want more. They want that extra dollar to hang it over their
Yes.
head or whatever it is. So some of these can be contentious. They could get ugly.
They can get ugly.
And that's where you need more lawyers, probably.
Well, yeah. And I think because there is a lot of emotion involved in it. I mean, and even though my process with my attorney was smooth, I think it helps because my attorney was also he was kind. He was very professional. He was very straightforward. He didn't, I felt like when he spoke to me, he was telling me the truth. He's like, hey, this is how it works. And it's not, and he was like, go about what's right, not about you being right, but do what's right.
Well, that's very good
and I
sage
think
advice.
That's very good sage advice. I mean, he's a judge now. So,
okay.
Yeah. But he also said, look, I don't need to sit down and do all of this stuff for you. It's emotional and it's hard. But if you guys are looking to save money, I mean, my first divorce was $500.
Lawyer fee.
My lawyer fee was $500. And I think $250 of that went to the filing,
Wow.
So he wasn't making a lot of money. And so he wasn't also going to do all of this paperwork for me. He's like, you write it all out. I just basically file for you because you're not arguing. And when I went into him again for the second one, he was at that point, he's like, okay, next time you get married, you need to have me like approve him first. But it was basic paperwork. So he was basically just doing the filing, and he did double his price the second time because he said I didn't learn my lesson. But
so you've moved around a lot, though. So what have you learned from the other states that you've been in New York? You've been everywhere. So what have you learned about the other states? Are there different laws in different places?
There are different laws in different places, and it's really important to know what the laws are in your state. It really is, because it does change things a lot. When I lived in New York and I met people who were experiencing divorce, they had to actually file for a legal separation before they could file for a divorce. You had to go through a whole process and be legally separated for a year before they could go and get a divorce.
Which cost more in lawyer fees.
Cost more.
Yeah.
And it didn't help keep them together. I'm not sure exactly what the thought process is on that. I think it's a lot more work to get out of. But I thought, wow, I really lucked out in my case that we were able to and my process took, I think, less than 2 months.
Well, Nevada, what? Quickie marriage, quickie divorce?
I mean, it should just be like in and out, and get a burger and fries with that. That's how quick it was. It was ridiculous.
But it's not that way in every state.
It's not. It's really not.
So these lawyers really have to be up on all the different state laws and where they practice of all the requirements for divorce.
Right. And I think it's, I think like when people are out there, when you're thinking, okay, I'm getting a divorce, what do I do? Like back in my day, I didn't have Google. I didn't have the internet. I couldn't look it up. This was, in the early 90s. I had to do things by asking people questions face to face or on a phone, and also, kind of wing it a little bit. And now we have so many other resources. So what I would think if I were doing this now is I would spend a lot of time on the internet Googling, what do I need? What kind of paperwork do I have to get together? What kind of information do I need to have?
Well, that's where one of our previous guests for Modern Split would be very helpful, because they provide packages of information for this.
Yes, they have a whole package of downloadable videos that walk you through it. And one of the things, that Claire with Modern Split had said is, you really need to know your state laws. There's a lot of people will reach out to her with specifics like, hey, I'm watching this video, but I need to know this. And that's where you really need to find someone in your state who knows the laws, because they do change. Things are changing all the time, like same-sex marriage.
Wow, yeah. That's just recently come about.
Right.
So there's probably a lot of different laws that are starting to be set and precedents being set about.
A lot of different things. And it's, when it comes down to emotion and that side of the divorce, a lot of that obviously is we're all human. So of course it's the same as any other marriage, a traditional marriage. So, but when it comes to the law, there's a lot of figuring it out because, well, as you're going to hear about from our guest today, because that's one of the things that she specializes in, she has experience in, is same-sex marriage, as well as high conflict divorce and custody battles.
So why don't you tell our listeners who our guest is this week?
I will be very, very happy to do that because she is awesome and just so much knowledge. I had so many questions for her. And and the other thing that I found interesting, boyfriend, before I make the introduction, is when speaking to an attorney, you can get a lot of information, but really, if you want specific information, you're going to have to know which state you're dealing with.
Yeah.
So let me introduce today's guest. Today's guest is Marilyn Chinitz, a formidable advocate for her clients, guiding them through some of the most challenging transitions in their lives. She concentrates her practice in matrimonial law, particularly high net worth divorce actions. Marilyn is a skillful negotiator whose numerous high-profile and celebrity cases have received national and international attention. She has more than 35 years of experience in every facet of family law. She's known for her straightforward, creative, and responsive approach to representing her clients. Marilyn is as successful in litigation as in settlement negotiations. She has argued winning appeals in the appellate courts of New York and in trials before the family court and the Supreme Courts of New York. When high-profile marital matters or recent changes in the law make headlines, Marilyn is a sought-after commentator. She is often quoted in print and has appeared on local and national television and radio shows, including NBC's The Today Show, ABC News 2020, Inside Edition, HLN's Headline News, and Hollywood Heat. So without further ado, I'd like you to meet Marilyn Chinitz. Marilyn, welcome to Life, Laughter, Divorce podcast.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Awesome. We are very excited to talk to you. I believe you are the first attorney where we are speaking really about the divorce cases themselves versus just mediation and things of that nature. So I'm really excited to learn more about this whole process, other than my own.
Well, everybody has different experiences, obviously.
Right. Yes, they sure do. And what seems right for one person always isn't right for the next person. And I know that you deal with a lot of high-profile clients, a lot of high-conflict clients, same-sex marriages and stuff. So I have plenty of questions for you. One of the things that you had mentioned to me when we spoke previously is that you really like to set your clients up for success after the divorce. And I know from being a divorcee myself, we oftentimes get caught up in the now, like just get me out of this now because it's so painful emotionally, financially, and we just can't see the forest through the trees. So I'm kind of curious, like, what does that look like to get your clients to a place where they can see down the road rather than what the hole that they're in at the moment?
Well, when you meet a client for the first time and they have decided that they're going to embark on terminating their marriage and turning their lives upside down and getting a divorce, you're seeing them at their most vulnerable point. Very often, particularly if you're representing women, they are not knowledgeable about their financial circumstances. So they're almost like a lost child. And you see this metamorphosis as time progresses from the beginning of the case to the conclusion of the case, how learned and knowledgeable clients become during this process. And when you see someone who had no idea what was on their tax return, had no idea what income was reported, knew nothing about where their accounts were, that level of vulnerability is so sharp. And then at the end of the case, to be able to see someone who is no longer dependent and lost, but rather knowledgeable and empowered, It's a wonderful process. And people do not believe that they actually are going to get through that process and that there is a finishing line and a new life. So I like to watch people learn, educate, become knowledgeable about who they are, about their financial circumstances, because then and only then they're able to make the right decisions for themselves, and if they have children, for their children. So going through a divorce very much is going through a learning process, and it depends how people want to embrace it. Being bitter and angry just shuts the door. You're focused on bad energy. Being aware of what's going on and making the right decisions and getting the right professionals to work with you is critically important. And that gives you the opportunity to be in the best hands, to get the right forensic accountants, the best attorney, the best therapist for you, for your children, so that you could glean all of this important information in making the right decisions for yourself. Is that a very long-winded answer?
No, but it makes so much sense. You're right, because it is a learning experience, and at the time it just seems like a very frustrating one.
Well, it's overwhelming for people.
Yeah, because they don't, hopefully we're only experiencing this once in our life, or maybe twice, in my case, twice, but hopefully only once. And because it's not that often, it's not a daily occurrence for most of us, it does seem overwhelming. So when we get into a situation that becomes higher stakes or higher conflict, how is that different for somebody? And what are some of the things that you find surprise your clients the most?
Well, I think what I have found is that people are so busy in their daily lives that they've never taken a step back to really understand what the assets are. What do they have? What do they own? How is it titled? You could look at different assets that are in the marriage, that are part of the marital estate, and you have to make decisions about what are the best assets for me to obtain. And it really depends on everybody's circumstances. If you're a mother and you're going to be the primary custodial parent, you may want to retain the home so that your children have a continuity and that stability. But you also have to understand what is in that asset. And what I mean by that is, what's the debt? What's the liability? So that when you make decisions, you understand what you are receiving, not just the asset, but the liability that comes with it. And also there's embedded tax in different assets. So if you're going to retain a house, there may be a time in the future that you're going to sell that house. There may be a capital gain tax. And so what I find very important is to educate your client about all of these different aspects so that they understand what their assets truly are. If I said to you, would you like $1 million in cash, or would you like $1.5 million in stocks and securities? Most people would say, I want the higher number. I want the $1.5 million. But if I then said to you, well, that $1.5 million, when you sell the stocks, is going to have a capital gain, so it's really going to be worth $850,000, then you realize the cash is far more valuable. So you have to be able to rely on experts and intelligent people to make sure that they peel that onion so that you get the essence of the information that you can make a decision on. So I like working with clients who want to know the answers. And as an attorney and as a professional, that is our responsibility, to make sure we know the law, to make sure we know tax information, trust and estate information. And if you don't know the depths of that knowledge, get the right professionals to work with you so that your client walks away with the right knowledge so that they can make the right decision for themselves going forward.
Good points, because you're right. What seems to be the obvious answer isn't always the best answer.
Yeah.
in things, and it is an education process. So knowing that when it comes to having assets, then it's probably a really good idea. What you're saying is a lot of the clients, and especially women, come into it not knowing all of what they have, what's in their bank accounts, what's in their investments. And once they go through this process and they learn that, do you find that going forward, they have a better grasp on what's going on, and that they don't do this again, and they keep a better tabs on their assets?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of benefits to the end of this process, and I see it as a practitioner. I see that people come out of this process feeling positive, all of a sudden feelings of independence and freedom. And there really is an upside of ending a relationship very often, because it gives people the opportunity with new knowledge to build a new sense of who they are, and without having to depend on another person. So for many people, the departure of a partner can open up new possibilities, self-renewal, individual growth. And now you have a knowledgeable person. They're going to make the right decisions going forward.
Yeah.
They know what their living expenses are. They know their lifestyle analysis. They're going to make the appropriate decisions. So you see a lot of good things come out of this negative. There's always a silver lining, I believe, to a negative. And I very often see people building a new sense of who they are, feeling engaged and empowered to try new adventures, to try new businesses, to do new things. It's an opportunity to self-examine and for individual growth, and something that you may have suppressed during your marriage. You now have the freedom and the ability to do something without somebody being critical or sitting judgment. You have the ability to make independent choices. So I find that there is a real sense of promise, because the future is wide open. So people have the opportunity to start over with a blank slate. We don't always get that opportunity. And most people that I find after this process, after the hurt, the anger, and the toxicity are removed, really have an opportunity to enjoy a new life. And I love seeing a client who was really in the depths and the weeds of a negative situation all of a sudden become hugely successful. And I've seen it over and over. And it's a great realization when people can pull themselves out of something negative. And it's also a great thing for children to see how challenges can be dealt with, handled, and overcome. It's a great role model in that regard.
Yeah, and you even had you had mentioned that a woman had come back to you about a year after, right, with a success story.
Yes. She was not American. She was European. I represented the husband. I was fairly aggressive in the litigation for various reasons, which we don't need to get into. And she was a very strikingly beautiful woman and very articulate. I don't think that she had the educational background, so she was somewhat dependent in this marital relationship. And she came back to me. She contacted me, and I was reluctant to meet with her because she was not my client. I called my client, and I said, "Is it okay if I meet with her?" And he said, "Yes." She came, and she said to me, "I want to thank you. You actually were the motivating factor for me to go out." She became a paralegal to get my education, to go to school to become a paralegal, and you were my role model. This woman who was aggressive yet, attractive, and you forced me to make changes in my life. And we actually stayed in contact. But that made me feel really good. I felt really bad during the case, but I felt really good that she took the negative and made it into a positive.
That's incredible. I love that story, because who would have thought that the person who's not your client would come back and say, "What a positive impact you had on my life."
Right.
Because you don't hear that in divorce cases.
No, you don't hear that. You hear some other things, like if you're representing one spouse, the other spouse that you were against ends up referring business to you and referring clients. That's a different type of compliment. This was quite remarkable, and I never forgot that story.
That's wonderful. Well, when it comes to you mentioned children and making an impact on children. When it comes to custody cases, because you do handle a lot of those that are also high conflict, including abductions and things of that nature, what are some of the things that have surprised your clients that they walk away such a better person as a result of?
Well, there is one very strong statement that I tell my clients, and they will come back to me years later and say, you said something to me and it really resonated. And I tell them that if you are strong, positive, and healthy, your kids will be stronger, positive, and healthier through this process. Children look at their parents and they want to know if you as a parent show weakness and depression and sadness, you really turn your kids' lives upside down. And if you show them, we're going through a difficult process, but we are going to enjoy every second, every day of our lives, and we're going to make something positive each and every day, you've given the greatest gift to your client, because they can then communicate to their children, and children will come through this difficult process in a very healthy way. And I think it's very, very important. Very often parents try to get back at the other spouse, and they do it through the kids, and it's a devastating thing to do to children. And the ramifications are so manifest years later. I did a workshop many, many years ago, and I actually thought about doing another one where the age was from 3 to 23. And each child spoke about their different experience during the divorce. And it's very often more difficult for kids to go through divorce later in life. When they're younger, it's a little easier. They just want to be in loving arms. They just want to be cared. They don't have these expectations because their little minds don't take them there. So every day is every day. Older kids have various expectations. And so when you pull the rug out from under them, they really feel that loss. And what every single child said was, I'm so grateful that my parent did not put me in the middle of a conflict. Other kids, unfortunately, said, they scarred me for life because I don't trust any relationship. And you can see how these kids, all of them, were so deeply impacted, positively and negatively, depending upon how their parents behaved during the divorce. So I think it's really, really important. If I have a client who wants to do something retaliatory to their spouse that's going to affect the child, I'm not interested in representing them. I think it's damaging. I think you have an ethical, moral, legal obligation to protect kids no matter what, and to keep them away from that harm. It's just unfair. They didn't ask for it. They don't have the tools to deal with it, and adults should know better.
Yes. I wouldn't have thought that when speaking to an attorney, I don't think all of us have the idea that you would come from this place of not that attorneys have a bad rap, don't get me wrong, but to hear you say that, I think goes a long way, because I think sometimes people, when they go and they get an attorney, they think, well, I'm going to get the other person and I am going to retaliate by doing this and by bringing this to court or asking for these expectations. And they don't realize that an attorney is a human being with ethics and morals that they're going to stand by.
And not only that, what happens is as children get older, they recognize the damage that was done.
Yeah.
You may alienate that child. That child may run to the other parent's arms. And so why do that? Why not just have a balanced way of addressing your children's needs? And it takes a lot for parents to take a step back. But as an attorney, I think we have that responsibility to make sure that our clients do not engage in that toxic situation where the kids really get affected.
Right. It's not about getting back at something. It's about doing what's right and what's just.
Look, there's something to be said about protecting children.
Mm-hmm.
If there is a parent who is a substance abuser, or a parent who is neglectful or negligent or sexually abusive, physically abusive, then that's a different story. You've got to do whatever you have to do to protect the child. But you making false allegations, and I've seen cases where a parent has made false allegations of sexual abuse, that parent in the end will lose custody of the child.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So you have to be thoughtful and careful about how you approach custody cases.
Right. So do you often find that, I mean, you probably get your fair share of people who come with the wrong idea, or they're looking for the wrong results, and they're probably surprised when they hear some of these things, right?
Well, you know what? I have the ability to say, I'm really not interested in representing you.
Right.
If my views and my way of doing things is not something that appeals to someone, or they're looking to hurt or to retaliate, and sometimes go over the line, something that becomes unethical, I'm not interested in representing that person.
Right.
I think it's you want to get people through this process, and there is a right way to do it. There's an ethical way to do it. There's a fair way to do it. Judges will then help your clients because they see that you're coming into the process authentically, looking simply to do the right thing.
Right.
We still have a system of justice. And in the end, that's what you want to achieve.
Which is wonderful. And that's the way it should be.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's a question of an attorney doing their homework.
Yeah.
Of doing all of the discovery that needs to be done, all the financial information that needs to be done, working really, really hard. That's the key. You can't gloss over anything. It really takes in-depth knowledge and work in order to get a good result for your client.
And what's really smart about this is once they go through this process with you and you're all on the same page of doing what's right versus what's vengeful, but doing what's right by the whole family, is that going forward, they can keep that mindset, and hopefully as other things come up, they can use that same mindset to find resolution.
Yes.
So again, like setting them up for a better future. What about in cases where it's high profile, where you have people who are well known? Are there things that surprise them in the outcome that you help them to set up for a better life afterward as a result? Because, you know, in something that's high profile, there's a lot of outside influence possibly.
Well, there's a lot of risk to high profile cases. Misinformation comes out. You want to make sure that that doesn't happen. People who have a high-profile celebrity cases, very, very wealthy people, everybody's clamoring to get dirt, information. And you as an attorney want to make sure that you seal that all up, that privacy is really, really important. Particularly when they have children, because you don't want a child to go on the internet and read all of these false statements about their high-profile parents. So you have in every situation, but probably it's magnified when it is a high-profile case. You want to make sure that things are done quietly, and sometimes just in an attorney's office. Sometimes it's better when just the respective attorneys are meeting and working through, because they have a mutual responsibility to protect their client's privacy because the stakes are so high. So very often those negotiations do go through the attorney's office rather than being heard in a court. And you try to make sure that the other side is as mindful as you are not to use this high-profile case for their own publicity. Mm-hmm. Lawyers make the mistake of thinking that they are the high-profile person. They're not. So they have to make decisions that protect their clients. And when somebody, leaks out a story or it gets filed in court, unfortunately, very often things get leaked, and that can cause tremendous damage. Most people are not interested in another person's divorce, but in a high-profile celebrity case, everybody's looking to see what's going on. So you want to close that. You want to shut it down. You want to make sure that there is an exposure for the client and particularly the children.
Yeah. What about when people are going through stuff like that and they do run into, and even whether it's high profile or not, I think a lot of people can learn from those, because in real life, like in the normal average life, people sometimes think, well, they tell everybody about it. Why wouldn't I tell everybody about it? And I think that's like a valuable lesson to learn, because the average Joe nowadays thinks they can put everything out on social media and that it's okay, and that they can tell a bunch of different things to a bunch of different people. But even though they're not necessarily, high profile or a celebrity status, that can still affect their case tremendously.
Well, you're hitting on a very important point, and that is, I tell all my clients when they're going through a divorce, stay off social media. I can't tell you the number of cases that I've represented a spouse, and the other spouse posts all these pictures about gifts that they just gave and gifts that they just, spent money on, whether it's a diamond ring for somebody or a Hermes bag, when they're saying that they have no money and they file affidavits in court that they're broke. And then all of a sudden you go on their social media, which becomes readily available, and you're finding out about the trip to Paris, and you're finding out the trip to Saint-Tropez, and the gifts that were lavished upon the new girlfriend. It becomes great evidence for me and as the attorney. Plus, people are silly. They think that they're talking to one person when they're on social media. And all of a sudden, you've just let out all this information to the rest of the world. So people are very vulnerable when it comes to that. They don't realize it until they're in a litigated situation. It comes back to haunt them.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people think, well, I'm not, the Kardashians or something. I'm not, of this status, and I can put this out there because I have 300 friends. But those 300 friends, like your profile, nothing's sacred on social media, as we've learned.
Right. And once you let something out, you have to know the rest of the world is going to get that information.
Yeah.
So, when you go through a divorce, you have to be careful about what's on your computers, your texts, your emails, your messaging, your Snapchat, your Instagram. You want to make sure that there's no spyware on your computer, that you're not being tracked, so that you are not in a situation where you're vulnerable in any way. So it's really you've got to be careful to make sure that your passwords are changed. You want to make sure that your information, to the extent that you can, remains private. During a divorce case, this information could come out and could be very damaging.
And not even during, all of that, yes. But also it's a good lesson for people moving forward, because anything that they'd posted on there previously could be used against them as well.
In everyday life, if you have, I see a lot of young girls in their 20s posting pictures in bikinis and very provocatively dressed. Well, when they're going to go for a job, an employer is going to go online and they're going to look at the social media and they're going to look at, who is this person that I'm interviewing? I see their resume. I see they came in with a suit, but now I'm looking at something diametrically opposite that's giving me a very different impression about this person. So you want to be able to project the right message to everyone. And so social media can be a very positive force, and it could be a very negative, very destructive force. So you have to be intelligent about it. Whether you're dating, whether you're getting a divorce, whether you're just single and living your life, you want to make sure that your communications are not going to be misinterpreted and that they remain it's always on a need to know basis. If somebody doesn't need to know, then you don't have to put it out there.
Right. All very good information, because you're so true. It can affect things not just in relationships of intimate type, but of business and things going forward. So,
Correct.
And I think so many people think it's just not going to happen to them, or they don't think of it until it's too late. So very, very good points. And also I noticed, you handle same-sex divorces also, which are new and not as common yet as divorce as we've known it in the past. Do you notice any differences, or are they very much the same as divorce in the past, or is there anything that has surprised you?
Well, the law has changed so dramatically over the past several years, fortunately. One, there are not only same-sex divorce cases, but there are same-sex custody cases where the parents were not married. And previously, the courts were not giving recognition to the parental rights of a parent who did not adopt the child of their partner. So if you did not, prior to the law changing, if you did not adopt the child to your partner, then you had no custodial right. So I had a case where two women were together for 10 years, and they had a child. The biological mother gave birth to the child, and they raised this child together, but the non-biological mother never adopted the child, and they were never married. When they split up, the non-biological mother sought custody rights, saying, I raised this child. I took this child to all her doctor's appointments. I took this child to school every day. I was the parent at home. I was the parent who raised this child. Why is the court telling me I have no rights to the child? And that was the law just a few years ago. Unfortunately, that changed. Those were very heartbreaking cases. And now if a couple is married and there is a child born during the marriage, it's presumed to be the child of the marriage. So you don't have to have, in New York, you don't have to adopt the child. But here's the problem. There's portability issues. If you leave New York and you go to a state that doesn't recognize a same-sex relationship, then you are back in the same situation that you were, that I just discussed, where you don't have parental rights.
Wow.
So the laws are changing. They're not changing quick enough. In New York, we are definitely seeing wonderful new decisions that recognize these relationships. They were even recognizing three parents in a child's life and giving recognition, because there is a de facto parent. When that parent has been the psychological parent, the parent with boots on the ground who's been there, you can't just take that person away from the child's life and think that there are no rights to be given. So we're seeing a proliferation of wonderful cases that are beginning to expand the definition of what a parent is.
Wow, you really have to know where you're living and what the laws are then.
Yes, you do. Very, very important. And particularly, same-sex marriages have other problems. For example, you could have a couple that has been together for 25 years. They've acquired lots of property. They've acquired property all through their relationship, but they only got married 3 years ago. Now the court's going to say, well, what's marital property and what's separate property? Marital property in New York is assets that were acquired during the marriage. That means assets that were acquired in the past 3 years. What happened to all of those assets that they acquired during their relationship when the state didn't recognize their marriage? So you have some complexities. And again, as time goes on and new cases come up and the courts are grappling with these issues, we're seeing really good decisions. Not in every state, because we still have states that are really backwards. that don't recognize a lot of these rights, but we're getting there.
Mm-hmm.
Not fast enough as far as I'm concerned. But, these divorce cases are the same as any other divorce case. Whether it's heterosexual or it's same-sex, people are going through the trauma of a divorce, and the same issues come up for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to custody, it's who's the parent who serves the child's best interests, not who's the biological parent. And I had the landmark case where I got custody for the non-biological parent, and that set a storm of questions. But I got the non-biological parent custody because we were able to establish that the child's best interests were served by that parent being the custodial parent for a variety of reasons. In that particular case, there were false allegations of sexual abuse. We disproved those allegations. The court was so offended by those allegations that no parent who could put a child through that kind of trauma should be the custodial parent. So the court made an absolutely correct decision. Mm-hmm. But the court analyzes these cases on the same standard of what's in the best interest of the child. That's the bottom line.
Right, which goes back to what you were saying before when we were talking about children. It's like what's ethical and what's right.
Correct.
What makes most sense, not what's retaliatory or vengeful. And
that's right.
And that is so important. I think what a learning process it is for us to be really aware of what our rights are and where we're living, what states where we're legal. Because a lot of times I think we think of like, where do I get work? Oh, we have to relocate. We go here. And then if a relationship issue comes up, well, look, now we're in Texas, for instance, and I believe they don't recognize they don't divorce same-sex marriages there because they don't recognize them as being married anyway, right?
Right. So you don't have that portability
right
when it comes to issues of custody. But if you're going to live in a state, you have an obligation to know what the state's laws are.
Yes. And I
think
think
very important. New York is very different than Connecticut. I happen to reside in Connecticut. Very different divorce laws. So New York recognizes separate property that you acquired before marriage or property that was gifted or that you inherited. And Connecticut will throw everything into the pot. That's quite different. And so you have to be cognizant of where you're going to start the action, what the laws are. Is it equitable distribution? Is it community property, equal distribution? You want to know these. If you have the ability to choose jurisdiction, you want to make an informed decision. So there are many cases where, lawyers have really screwed up because they weren't doing their homework and really examining what the laws were in a particular jurisdiction, and clients can get hurt that way.
Yeah, so important. Which leads me to my final couple of questions here, and that's on setting people up for the ultimate success. And you also do prenups, and in doing so, that kind of helps prevent this overwhelm feeling because they've prepared for the worst if it possibly happens. It's like having earthquake insurance, right? So.
Yeah. So prenups, I think, are very important. They are important for a lot of reasons. Very often people don't know who they're marrying. They don't know what their financial situation is. They don't know if they're marrying somebody with great wealth, with tremendous debt. And so it's an opportunity for people to know the financial circumstances of the person that they intend to marry, because you have to be able to make the right decisions. And furthermore, when you are going to an attorney to draft a prenup, you want to make sure that prenup is going to be enforced years later, and that it's not going to be subject to a challenge for being unconscionable or unenforceable for reasons such as it wasn't done correctly. If you're going to have a prenup, you want to make sure, number one, that you have an attorney that negotiates the terms of the prenup long before you say I do. You want to make sure that you've provided full financial disclosure, because if you're going to be waiving rights, you're entitled to know what you're waiving your rights to. So financial disclosure has to be made. No agreement can be unconscionable. You can't have a complete waiver of everything and then expect that you're going to be in a relationship for 20, 30 years and you're going to walk out in this relationship with nothing, with no support. So you have to make sure that there is some consideration in the agreement. And so it's really important that if you're going to enter into a prenup, which I think is very helpful for first marriages and particularly for second marriages, you want to make sure that that agreement is going to be rock solid and not going to be subject to challenge. Second marriages, you see the need for prenups, particularly where there are children, and you want to protect your children so that they, in fact, inherit what you work so hard for. So you see more and more prenuptial agreements in second and third marriages, but certainly in a first marriage where there's a lot of family wealth, the family wants to see that that family wealth is protected. And so prenups are definitely in order in those situations. And most importantly, you want to avoid the conflict in the future to the extent that you can. You can't resolve everything in a prenup. You can't talk about custody because the children are not born. And so there are some things that you can discuss in a prenup and some things that are just going to have to be dealt with in the future by a court. But at least the distribution of assets and how to deal with them can be addressed in that prenup.
Right, right. And finally, on the prenup thing, what is your thoughts on having a prenup for a same-sex marriage? How much more important, if at all, is it?
I mean, I think it's an important document to have regardless of who you are marrying, whether it's a heterosexual couple or a same-sex couple. A prenup, again, is not going to deal with the custody of the child. If there is a child already, it doesn't matter what you put into a contract, because 10 years later, it could be a totally different situation. And courts sit as a third parent. So there's a doctrine called parens patriae, and that means that the court is not bound by the contract that you and your spouse or partner entered into concerning children, because they will look years later at what's in the best interest of the child. And so whatever you put into that document 10 years ago may not be relevant anymore. So whether it's same-sex or it's heterosexual couples, prenuptial agreements are going to protect the financial aspects of the relationship.
Right. And my only question on the same-sex marriage, would it be a little bit more beneficial for now to have a prenup, because if you move to a different state where maybe it's not recognized in the same way, or because you'd been together so much longer before the laws came into effect of legalizing the marriage, would it be helpful to have that stuff, or would it make no difference?
Yes,
it would.
Absolutely. And again, it's that portability issue.
Right.
And
Okay.
so if you're married in New York, but you then move to a state that doesn't recognize that marriage, but you have a prenup, that's a contract. And so you want to make sure that you're fully protected. Again, because there is a lack of uniform in our laws throughout the states, we want to make sure that these relationships are protected, whether they're protected under the law, and if they can't be protected under the law, then they're protected by contract.
Awesome. This has been so helpful. You've been just a wealth of knowledge and information that we often don't think about until we're in the middle of it, and then it's swimming in our heads. And I love all the information that really sets up for success for the next relationship.
Well, I am very delighted to impart my knowledge. I've been doing this for 35 years, and I always learn every single day, which makes my work so wonderful. So to the extent that I can impart knowledge and experience, I'm happy to do so.
I love it. And I can totally see why people come back to you a year later and say, wow, you've really inspired me.
Well,
so
here's
much good stuff.
The wonderful news is I stay in contact with my clients, which is why my practice is so unique. Every year I have a big luncheon with a lot of different new clients, old clients, business people. And I love putting people together so that they can, A, get inspired, share their experiences, and market and do some business together. So it's a continuity that I think is really important. And those clients ultimately start new businesses, they buy properties, and you become that person, their go-to person. So that's always lovely.
Yeah, that's great relationship building, and it shows that you're there just beyond this one experience, which is so important, and people, I mean, people really are benefiting from it. Thank you so much for taking the time out. I know your phone's been blowing up and people are trying to reach out to you.
I've been trying to hang up on everybody.
I know, so I'm not going to keep you any longer. All of your contact information is going to be put on our show notes on our website and also in the show notes that go with each episode. So thank you so very much. And I'm sure
pleasure.
Our
really
listeners
nice
are going to love it.
To
Nice talking to you too.
Okay.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.